JP Morgan once said the first step towards getting somewhere is to decide you're not going to stay where you are. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Nerdy Optometrist, a podcast channel for all things optometry. And this is your host, Ukti Vora. Before we get started to the episode, please remember to like this video and share it with your friends because we're going to talk about something very interesting today. Our guest for today is a known personality in the industry, I would say. Many of you might have seen her in different forums where she's, presenting, talking, and representing her company. But apart from that, she's also a fellow podcaster. So it feels amazing to talk to someone, who actually shares the same background. So let me dive directly into introducing our guest for today, Dr. Priscilla Chang. She's a residency-trained optometrist living her best life in California. Yes, we both are based in California. You can see how, I'm so interested to talk about her. Her interest includes anterior segment pathologies, refractive surgery, and specialty contact lenses. She currently works as a clinical sales consultant for Johnson & Johnson's Vision's myopia team, where she launched Acuvue Abiliti in the Central California and Los Angeles territories. In her free time, as I mentioned, she's a co-host of the podcast, The Cornea Corner, where she likes to talk science about eyeballs. And it is definitely something you all should check out. I'll be dropping the link of her podcast in the description. So if you are a nerd in the space of cornea contact lenses, that's the podcast just for you. With that, Priscilla, a warm welcome and welcome to the Nerdy family.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for inviting me and giving me this opportunity and platform to talk. I think I'm always on the other side, interviewing other people and asking questions. So this is going to be a very great conversation, I think.
Yes, I am so excited. And it's always fun and tricky, I would say, because you want to be like more relaxed because you're asking the question and now you are on the hot seat.
I'm in the hot seat, everybody.
All
okay,
right,
I'm willingly here for the record.
So this is something that we wanted to do for a while now because I had met you last year in San Diego at AO, and I knew that there were so many things that we could talk about. But before we get into the topic for today about like moving forward and deciding to do something different, I want to know how your journey started. How were you introduced to the world of optometry? Was it your planned decision or was it an accident?
I don't think anything in my life has been truly planned. So I'll just say that for the record. But I would say my journey towards optometry specifically probably happened around undergrad. I happened to be a latent hyperope and thankfully blessed with good eye health. And my parents never brought me in for an eye exam. So all I had were vision screenings through school. And that was kind of my exposure to eye care. And in college, when I was doing a lot of soul searching, trying to figure out like what I want to do with my life, I just kind of landed on healthcare and just started systematically going down the list of where do I want to go? What could I see myself doing? And what were potential things I wouldn't like? And so optometry really stood out to me as something that, maybe I haven't done my due diligence in learning about. And I did my undergrad at UC Berkeley, and they happened to have an optometry school. And ironically, I was assigned a faculty mentor, who was in the optometry program. And she kind of handles pediatric eye care. And she had started to kind of tell me a little bit about her work, but really encouraged me to do the exploration on my own. And it's really funny because full circles, I came back to optometry because, during undergrad, I started, doing a ton of volunteering, and there's just such a need for eye health in like the surrounding area. And through that, I really was inspired by the amount of modalities I think optometrists can practice in, but also how meaningful the work is in being able to preserve vision and also being able to make such a difference in our patients' life, and whether that is diagnosing medical conditions or helping them see through glasses and contacts. And so just kind of going down that route was kind of, or that rabbit hole is kind of where I was like, oh my gosh, the more I learn, the more nerdy I get. And the more I'm like, I love this, I want to do it. So that's kind of how I leaned in and got into optometry.
That's perfect. And I'm so glad we got an optometrist like yourself who is looking with a change in the community and contributing towards eye care. Thanks to your mentor, and we're really happy to have you in the community and optometry. So you did tell us about your journey of how it started, but I really want to know how your transition happened after your optometry school to landing to your current role, where you are working as a clinical sales consultant. Can you tell us about your journey there?
Yes, of course. I think no one has a unique, or everyone has a unique path into industry. And for me, it all started as an optometry student and just being open to opportunities and just asking the like questions to everybody just to understand how optometrists can impact, industry, inform strategic decisions by eye health companies, but also just what are we doing in the exam lane and how do we continue to feel connected to others if we're, kind of by ourselves most of the day. And so right out of optometry school, I knew that I had an interest maybe in industry, but didn't really kind of explore it because I knew that fundamentally I went into optometry school to be a clinician, which I'm sure is a very similar story to a lot of our listeners. It's like you go to school because you wanted to see patients and maybe play with the 4-opter and the cool toys, right? um, but the thing is, I pursued a residency in ocular disease, in refractive surgery, corneal, pathologies, contact lenses. And during that time, I realized the value of being close with your industry partners. So, and I say that because like your reps that comes in to like talk to you about the newest technology out there, I think it's very common as for doctors to think that, hey, we should shut them out because like they're trying to influence us, right? And we know what we're doing cannot be influenced. We want to be unbiased in our care. And I think it's very noble and totally possible for doctors to do that. But if you embrace it, what ends up happening is now you open up to someone who is a wealth of information, who's been trained in the newest thing out there. And you just need to entertain that conversation, right? Just hear them out for what they're saying. And then you can inform how you handle patient care. And so during residency was actually when I got a chance to help out at some scleral lens workshops hosted by industry. And through that, I got tapped to be a speaker on the speaking bureau. So I was like, okay, this is perfect. Like I'm part-time seeing, patients and then, or full-time maybe seeing patients. And then on the side, I get to dabble in a partnership with industry and continue to educate other colleagues and talk science. So I was like, I'm getting paid to talk science with people. Like, I love that. And in the same breath, it was like, okay, well, my next job after my residency should involve kind of maybe a similar setup because I knew I was in a happy place. And so in clinical practice, I spent 1.5 years and during that time gave everyone my time of day, like who was a rep that I was like, hey, let's hear what you got to offer because I want to make sure I'm staying up to date with everything. And once you're kind of in clinical practice, I think it's very easy to feel disconnected from industry or from what's happening out there because you're seeing patients and you probably don't have a ton of PTO to go out to all the conferences and learn everything. And so the source of information becomes the publications you're reading, your own colleagues, so your close knit circle of least confusion or your group. And then, and beyond that, you also have these reps that are coming through. And so I think during that time I was practicing in the middle of like, COVID and, seeking a side project, and Cornea Corner kind of like was birthed from that time of trying to understand how do I fill some of those things that brings me joy, whether that's, educating, because you're not going to be flown out to speak to people in the middle of COVID. Like, it's not going to happen. And so it's like, how do I continue to educate? And I realized I was kind of on a soapbox, like you're just talking. And it's like, who's listening? Right. And so when the opportunity arose to even consider going into industry, which happened with a personal reason for having to move to Southern California, I was like, I'm going to entertain this, fully consider it, and maybe go through with the process and see if it's a good fit. And that opportunity happens to be on the commercial side, happens to involve sales, but also involves consulting on a specialty lens that, I category wise that I am interested in. So that's kind of how I ended up kind of leaning towards industry. And it all kind of came from the direct connections made during clinical practice.
I actually have to say a couple of things which you did mention during your response was like you did mention casually, but I think it's worth mentioning and highlighting of being open to opportunities. Sometimes we are so myopic in the way we see things. Is like I want to
No pun
only
intended.
I only want to do private practice, or I only want to see patients because that's why, I became a clinician, or I only want to do industry. I don't want to see clinic. I don't want to do clinical practice, right? It could be either ways. But as you rightly mentioned, like you learned something in your clinical practice because you were open to opportunities before you were because you were listening to people and you were out there to learn. And I think that's the biggest thing which I feel has even helped me because I started the podcast to help people, but honestly, every time I talk to someone, I learn 10 times more than, I am even like trying to
Word.
just ask questions, right?
Yeah.
But what I learned from you is so much more valuable. And that's all what is helped you even progress in your career and be where you are. But I'm
And
really, really, really impressed in terms of like, you taking in and grabbing your opportunity and finding ways to contribute whichever way you can. And I think one other important thing you mentioned was, finding your happy place. Sometimes
right.
even though you are not really happy, you stick to a position or a role just because you thought this was right, not giving yourself a chance to like, let me try something else and see if that's better. You can always come back to your clinical practice because that's what you've been trained for, but give yourself a
Right.
chance to fail.
Right. I think it's the sunk cost fallacy where we think we've spent so much time getting the training to be a clinician that even if you're unhappy, it almost feels like you have to stick it out. When in reality, like optometry is beautiful in the sense that you really can do anything that you want to do. So you got to find that happy place. You got to find what you're passionate about. And as you're passionate and doing what you're meant to do, like people will recognize that. And that's where those opportunities, like if you're open for it, will come knocking.
Absolutely. And you did mention, right, like you transitioned from your private practice to industry, and not just transition, you transitioned and learned new things amazingly because you were already being recognized as the rookie of the year for your role. So that's an incredible achievement. But I'm sure that would not have been easy. But before we go into the hard part, do you have some important learnings that you would like to share, during that year of like, trying to learn how to even survive this role because you were not trained to be a clinical sales consultant. You've been trained and
Yeah.
practicing as an optometrist. Tell
Right.
us about the good part.
Well, I realized I don't know if I answered even your other question about what it is that I actually do as a clinical sales consultant. And I think there's a lot of ambiguity in that. So maybe I'll kind of segue into some of those key learnings that came out of it. But when I was approached for this position and learned about it, it was very much like, hey, Priscilla, or hey, Dr. Chang, we are Johnson & Johnson. We recognize that we have not been in the space of myopia management, and we've identified that need, and we really need doctors who understand that space very well to join our team so that you can help us make it right. So like help our approach be strategic, but also help us help other doctors, maybe like you, who, maybe may not be as passionate, but are okay and open to learning. And you would be that person that can help them with that implementation, but also the execution of that plan to develop myopia management as a specialty in their clinic. And so my current job involves a ton of different hats. I feel like even though sales is kind of a key component of it, and that is a metric that our leadership will look at. But part of even being rookie of the year comes from just the level of dedication and openness to being solutions oriented and just approaching a problem head on and figuring out like, how do I improve the process? How do I make this better for the doctors that are our customers? And how do we continue to be patient-centric in everything that we do? Because that is like literally the first line of the credo of our company. And so I think everyone that's a part of our company believes that very strongly. Like we want to do best by everyone who's using our product, but like it comes before the money. And so part of the job involves like, hey, Acuvue Abiliti Overnight is a orthokeratology lens. Everyone thinks Acuvue is a soft lens company, and we're changing your minds. And this is how we're doing it by offering 100% support from local doctors or sales reps who are trained to be able to support you with implementation as well as product support. So even our sales reps, they're who have no eye care background, it's amazing that they're able to consult on troubleshooting orthokeratology cases. Like that's kind of the level that they've expected us to come at, because we want to be able to bring our expertise to the doctors who maybe have thought about dabbling in myopia management, but never really kind of jumped over all those hurdles and went past all the speed bumps and just like kept going. And I would say it's an evolving like space, and really doctors should care, because odds are most of your practice you have myopic kids, myopic adults, and like we should care about those statistics about how more and more people are becoming myopic.
Yeah.
And so part of the job also involves a lot of training. So I train staff, I trained the doctors on how do you have this conversation from the moment someone calls you and you're able to present myopia as a solution, and as something that your myopia management as a solution, as something that you care deeply about as a clinic. And then all the way up until the doctor decides, okay, is this patient even a good candidate for orthokeratology? And how do we even decide what's the right modality? And then from there, after you fit someone in a lens, how do we interpret topography images? How do we ensure that we're doing the best that we can to optimize this fit and get this patient going as we change their lives? And so that's why I say I do put on a lot of hats, because part of that is helping out with marketing, helping out with, working on these cross-functional teams to come up with the tools necessary and utilize J&J's resources to make a difference. And so part of like going back to your question about key learnings that came out of this, I think really is the value that optometrists can bring into industry. That's major. I thought just having 1.5 years of clinical experience, I'm like, that's like nothing. I'm a baby optometrist, right? Like, what do I know? And, the questions we're hearing and learning, like really, like even my 1.5 years was very, very valuable in understanding what it's like to be the doctor. And no one will understand that but us. And so how do we utilize those learnings and bring it into industry to inform what they're doing? And I think that's one thing that we do not think about as ODs is, okay, everything that we touch in an exam room or interact with, prescribe, like odds are some optometrists filtered it, thought about it really hard, and like came back and, they improved it and iterated on that and those learnings. And so I think doctors don't give, at least maybe me and the doctors I talk to a lot, like my close-knit friends from optometry school, is like, we honestly do not give ourselves enough credit for how much value we do bring to our patients, but even more value into the industry space. Would you agree that that's what's happening over at TopCon?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, something that you did mention, that when you say, right, like when you're transitioning from practice to industry, we think somewhere that we are detaching ourselves, but honestly, we have an opportunity to zoom in and out as needed. Because when you're working with the doctors, right, you need to know what the practice looks like. You need to know what is the patient's perspective. You need to know what are the questions, what are the responses, what are the challenges at the root level, what the doctors are facing at a daily basis. And then you come back and now you have to think in terms of finding a solution to help them promote it. So it's not just like one-on-one interaction. It's not that if you're in industry, you detach from everyday practice, you don't care about what doctors are doing. It's actually absolutely opposite. Now you have to think about what all doctors are doing, not just you.
Not N of one.
So it's very interesting, and I can totally hear you. I feel the exact same thing when I am working, in TopCon and trying to build a telehealth solution, because clinically you're like, okay, I am a solution user, but now you are building a solution. So it's different to kind of go back and forth and switch the hat from being an optometrist to an industry person and going back to an optometrist, because you have that skill, others don't.
Well, I think that's one of the coolest thing about the potential when
True.
you join industry is, yes, you are the voice for yourself, but you're also the voice for so many other optometrists. So when we say optometry is small, it's not, I mean, obviously it's small because of like the networks, and you probably, if you go to enough conferences, you start seeing the same people and you start being like, these are my people, even though you live across the country, like, the community, I think, that surrounds optometry will be very strong and present. But I do think when you're in industry, you get the opportunity to like talk to those people in those boardrooms making decisions, and they happen to be people who have deep pockets or people who really have the agency to make some of those changes that are really going to change and affect how optometry can practice, right? Like right
Yeah.
now, like, or one of the things that really inspires me about Acuvue Abiliti and Acuvue Abiliti overnight is that it's the first ortho K lens that has, number one, FDA approval for myopia management, but also it's backed by a healthcare company. Like, that is the potential of having a company like J&J in the space. But also, like, when you think about as an OD, like, oh my gosh, how do I get those referrals from pediatricians or the other professions? Like, who else but a better ally than an industry partner like J&J, who, they're in the space of baby products. Like, let's just think about that, right? It's like, okay,
Right.
like, if we really want to change how we kind of impact like the profession professionally, I think there's just a lot of ways by route of industry to do that. And it's not for everyone, but I do think that that's where it's very valuable to even kind of consider it and being open to those opportunities. Like you were saying, you can always fall back to patient care if you needed to, because you're always zooming in and out of all those different lenses. So we're kind of like behind our own four out there, right? Or like optometrists, like, regular optometrists, or, in a OMD setting, like, so you can always like look through different lenses to figure out what's going on. But I think we have a lot of job security as optometrists. Like, I don't think we'll ever be truly replaceable. I know you work in telehealth, but like,
No, but
I think,
still I need optometrist. I'm never,
right,
I don't, the reason, so again, that's a myth which I'm trying to kind of break, where people feel, oh, you're going to replace me. I'm like, no, I need you to do, but now you can
someone's got to
see,
interpret this. Like,
someone has to do the refraction, someone has to do the
right,
interpretation, and now you can see beyond four walls. Like, I'm going to increase your volume, I'm not going to take away the job.
right.
So it's just changing that perspective. But when I know, when I came from, like, clinical practice to industry, I had my hesitations. I had no idea what I'm doing. I
Yeah,
had no
right.
idea how I'm going to survive. I'm like,
Right.
do they want me to make the decisions? Like, seriously?
Yeah.
So I know you told the good part about it, like, making a difference, bringing in the value. But I also want to check with you and see, do you relate to these questions? What were your challenges in this role when you transition?
Girl. This is where we get deep. um, I would say there's been a ton of challenges, I think, transitioning over. And probably one of the biggest ones is just understanding all the regulatory bodies that exist in optometry. And like, there's a reason why they exist, because things went really bad at one point, and now there's so many rules and yellow tape put up so that, if industry is interacting with, say, doctors or doing things, like, we kind of have to keep those things in consideration. So it's not always like quid pro quo where I'm paying you to fit my product or do this. And I do think that as an OD, we're just like, well, we know better than to, you bought me a drink, but that doesn't mean I fit your products. So like, I can totally see it from the OD's perspective. It's like, just because you bought me a meal doesn't mean like I'm suddenly like your customer for life. But like, kind of those rules do exist where we have to be very compliant with how we have those conversations to ensure that we're also protecting ourselves, but we're protecting the patient. Like, that's the kind of the bottom line, is like, there are a lot of like yellow tape that exist, and that's where there's a reason for it. But that was definitely a challenge for me as a clinician transitioning over, because I had no clue. Like, I had no clue my rep couldn't say XYZ to me, and I would be like, but you're evading the question. And to be honest, like, we're not doing that. We just can't do it. Like, we're risking our job and the company's reputation, like, all of that, by not being able to have those conversations. But I would say it's been really refreshing for me to even have that conversation with doctors and be like, hey, like, this is what happens. Like, the peek behind the curtain is like, these things exist. And like, I know you want to talk to someone about it. It just won't be me because I'm on the commercial side, but I can I can connect you with people who can get you the answers. It's just, you got to be a little patient. So I would say one of those, the major challenges is communicating that with doctors, because I do not think doctors interact with commercial colleagues who are also doctors like very often. It's all like, it's almost like we don't really know what happens behind the scene. We just know like you're probably doing something cool, right? Like it's probably what your colleagues will say, right? Like they're like, oh,
Yeah.
you're doing something cool. Like how great is it that you get to work for TopCon? But like not really realizing like there are challenges that, because we're zooming in and out, right? And like seeing the perspectives and putting all those different hats, like we have to operate within a structure.
True.
And so I would say that's probably one of the major ones. The other major one probably is just like putting down my OD hat and being like, when you're an OD, you almost like, you can make all the decisions, right? Like you're like, I know exactly how I'm going to manage this. I diagnosed it. Like this is what's happening. And you're kind of top of the food chain. And I'm not saying that when you join industry, you're at the bottom of the food chain, but I am saying that like when you go into industry, like sometimes you can very strongly be or believe that something is like right and have a very strong conviction, but like to them, you are an N of one. And so it's always like, how do we validate that? And it's like, I'm like, well, I talk to my friends every day. Like I know what they're thinking, like I know exactly what the other ODs are thinking, but from the company standpoint, they kind of have to be like, okay, well, how many people think that way? And so that's been another kind of not challenge per se, but maybe adaptation into this role where now like the way I talk maybe is more like, okay, like if I identify a problem and I want to do something about it, let me quantify it and then like go act on it. Whereas in clinical practice, it's like, my tech isn't doing this and I really need you to start asking this question. And it's like, you can quickly change the paperwork or change that like script that they're going off of to kind of help change the entire process. So I think when you work in a company, there's number one, regulations, but number two, change maybe a little bit slower than you expect it to be. And I would say even for my colleagues who are ODs on my team, like we all feel that often and we're like, oh my gosh, if only we're in clinical practice, right? So I think it's fair to have those kind of challenges, but I think that would come with any role in industry and just being like everything that you do, like you're not like there's more opinions that matters.
That's true. And also, I think sometimes, at least this was one other challenge which I faced, right? Like, because we've been trained to be an optometrist, right?
Mm-hmm.
Luckily, I did undergo my MBA training. So then I had a little bit of experience in terms of thinking from business perspective.
Mm-hmm.
When you come directly, right? Even though I did an MBA, right? There are a few things which, as you mentioned, right? You have strong opinions about because like
Right.
this is how it works. Like, I know this, I've been doing this.
Right.
And then from a business perspective, we don't really have that experience to kind of switch that lens and be like, okay, from a business perspective, how useful or successful or impactful that will be. And then you're supposed to kind of reevaluate your conviction and your thoughts, and you're like, oh yeah, maybe it's not that much of an important thing, or you feel, no, it is right, let me go and
Right.
pursue it, right? So I think
Right.
that's a tricky part to kind of challenge your own thoughts and beliefs when you're like, this is what I've been doing for years.
Right, right. And I that's why I was like, it's not like a big challenge, it's just a learning, right? Like we're constantly learning about now you're representing more than just yourself. And I think it's very valuable to think that way too, to be like, okay, like this is an impact and opinion of one person. And then if we start seeing trends, like again, we can act on it, but now more people would benefit from the outcome of whatever change we are implementing. And so I think that's where, again, it's like very valuable to be kind of on the industry side because you have a seat at the table.
Yeah.
And, sometimes I think about it, it's like, yes, all my optometry friends are great people, but like, if we're in clinical care, like who's really speaking for us in industry? Right. And, it really, I mean, maybe it's not even in optometry, but like how often are you a consumer of a product and then you use it for a little bit and you give it a trial and you're just like, who thought this was going to be okay? Like what happened? And so some of that, is like the market research that goes in and like really kind of how do we understand the customer and their needs? And I think with any job in industry, those are very important elements that is like considered.
That's true. And I mean, I think you brought up a very, very important point in terms of representation and diversity as well. Sometimes, like as much as you might feel like, say, the processes are slow or the learning curve is more, you're not sure if this role is even meant for you, like, when you started. Now you're enjoying, probably you would have not enjoyed, but at least for that brief moment, you are representing the industry, your colleagues, like, women, you're like, there's so much representation that goes in, and it's always something that you come back with a learning. It's not, even
Mhm.
if it is like good or bad, at least you'll know this is not for me, or you like, this is for me, I'm doing this for life, at least you'll have some
Right.
clarity.
Right. And I would say another thing I've noticed about joining industry is like, obviously I have a ton of friends on LinkedIn who are ODs, who are burnt out, who have reached out and was like, what is it like on the other side? And I would be remiss if I didn't mention, like, there is burnout on the other side as well. But I would say that what's really neat is just the potential of other jobs that you can
Right.
do within, like, up as an optometrist in industry. Like, literally the world is your oyster. Like, like you can really kind of transition from being like, hey, I want to do marketing, I'm going to explore that. And for, some time, maybe I'll do a project where I get to work with another team and see if I like how they think, what they're doing, and do I see myself enjoying that and more. And so in a sense, like, if you're at that stage where you're like, don't like optometry that much, like, you might actually fall in love with optometry again, because now we're tapping into very different skill sets than your diagnostic and communication skills. Now you really kind of get a chance to tap, like, maybe the creative hat if you want to do, that. And so in a sense, I feel like for industry, there's the people who reach out to me, I would say, like, continue to talk to people, continue to network, and just seek to understand what jobs really are, and not just look at it as like it's greener on the other side of the fence, right? Like, it's really like, hey, it may not be greener, but like, would I enjoy what I do and the impact that I could make over there more? And then, really kind of understand the full picture. And what I've noticed, and maybe you've noticed too, the people who reach out to you, is that the doctors who reach out to me who are interested in industry, a lot of them are just like, I just want to do industry. And I'm like, what does that mean? Like, what does it mean? There's just so much over here that you kind of should maybe do more informational interviews to figure out what that means. And if you have any inkling of what you like, then at least people who are in industry can direct you to another OD, maybe on whatever team or whatever kind of space you're thinking of. But, without kind of some of those guidance, it's hard to start job hunting, really, because, it is a big move to leave clinical practice, and clinical practice will always be there. But, like, be in tune with what you're passionate about and where your happy place is.
That's true. I think, well, all that you mentioned, I cannot agree more in terms of what I also feel. And I think it's very important to not think like, it's just beautiful on the other side. Challenges are same, your struggles are same, you do burn out, but it's just, which burnout do you enjoy more?
Right. Which kind of grinding, an exam room or not?
That's true. And I think we did talk a lot about, like, the challenges, the good, the bad about your role. So thank you so much for sharing all of that. But now we're going to dive into something which is not at all related to optometry. Let's dive into our game segment, which is
Lord.
to know you a little better. It's going to be all fun, I promise.
And now the hot seat starts, right?
Well, this game is really simple. It's called this or that. I'll give you two options. You pick your preference.
And do I have to explain it, or it's
So
just
just pick an
okay?
answer.
All right, this is
See,
fun.
though it's a hot seat, I'm very, very nice to my guests. So don't worry. This is just for us to know who you are as a person. So another hat for you is to just know you. Who is Priscilla Chang, not Dr. Priscilla
Potatoes.
Chang.
I love my carbs. I'm kidding. All right, let's get on track.
Perfect. All right. My first question. Are you a dog person or a cat person?
Oh, wow. This is harder. Oh my gosh. This can be divisive. I would say I could be both, but I'm probably more of a dog person.
Oh, okay. What do you prefer, a call or a text?
I like calls. I do randomly call people just when I think of them, which is always enjoyable to hear people's voice. But I would say what I've heard on the news recently is that the next generation really enjoys leaving voice memos. So there's no space for you to misinterpret the tone. And for that, I haven't explored it, but I would be open to voice memos in a text format.
Okay, interesting. Glasses or contacts?
Contacts, just purely because that's what my bread and butter right now.
Would you prefer online shopping or shopping in store?
Definitely in person. I would say that's who I am. I happen to live near a mall, and I love like the ability to touch things and being like, okay, tactically, do I like this? But Amazon and all those online retailers are great. They have very generous retail or return policies and stuff like that. So, but yeah, but I think if I had to pick, that would be in person.
Perfect. Would you prefer cakes or ice creams?
Cakes or ice cream? I would say I lean more towards ice cream, but I am lactose intolerant. So I was thinking about this. I was like, maybe sorbet.
Yeah, that we'll keep sorbet as an option. I didn't know about it. So see, that's what the
Yeah.
whole idea of this game was, to know you better. Okay. Oceans or mountains, your happy place?
Oh, I would say the mountains. Yeah, mountains.
Okay.
Mountains are calling.
Horror movie or comedy?
Oh, comedy any day. Cannot do horror.
Most important thing in your partner, intelligence or being funny?
Um, I think funny, just like approaching life with joy.
And more sense of
Probably
humor?
the route I would go.
All right, that's wonderful. You did great in the game, and we definitely knew a lot more about you and call you instead of texting. That's what you prefer. You're a dog person. So
Oh my
it was
gosh.
nice to know. And next time we meet, we'll go for a sorbet instead of ice creams, because I
Oh, I
now
look
know that
forward
you're
to it.
lactose intolerant.
What's the next conference you're going to be going to?
Mostly Vision Expo West.
Okay. Okay. I don't think I'm going to that one, but if I find an opportunity, I will conveniently be present in Las Vegas and we will be able to connect and eat sorbets.
Absolutely, absolutely. And before I let you go, first of all, thank you so much for such an insightful conversation. I had so much fun talking to you. But I would like you to share one final takeaway message for all my listeners, before we end this conversation.
Oh, final message. I would just say, for anyone who's thinking about industry, don't hesitate to reach out. Distinguish whether or not you like being field-based or internal, and just never stop asking questions and being curious. I think in my current role, I do meet a lot of doctors who are maybe older and just they've been complacent with, the status quo and they've been pretty happy, but I can really see that being a source of burnout for our colleagues. And so if you continue to stay curious, you will continue to learn. And as our profession is growing in our understanding of pathologies, our new novel treatment options, and there's just so much unmet need in optometry that we just can't be myopic, and we have to think about how do we manage that and how do we continue to be open to those opportunities that arise. And in the same breath, be passionate, be a very passionate optometrist. And so whatever floats your boat, like lean in all the way, whether that's starting your own podcast, talking to people, starting a YouTube channel, whatever. And I guess it doesn't have to be optometry, but really just enjoy life.
That's
So
that's
yes,
so
that was
true.
not one final takeaway message. That was like, I'm on my
No,
soapbox and I'm like, I'm going to keep, oh, also, by the way, do myopia management if you're in practice.
I like how you're like, you know what, you need to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Like, okay, just get it all done.
Yes, everything.
But no, definitely, I feel being curious and being passionate definitely helps you keep going, because sometimes you don't want to be like burnt out just because you didn't know that opportunity did exist, and you didn't know that you could have a better life or something different, which was not
Right.
probably what you planned. And the fun is to enjoy life when it's not planned. So I think that's a great takeaway message. Thank you once again, Priscilla, for your time. It has been a pleasure talking to you. And once again, welcome to the Nerdy family.
Thank you so much. Find me on the Cornea Corner on all podcasting platforms.
Yes, and I will be dropping the link of how you can connect to her on LinkedIn, and also the link for the podcast. So do check out all things about cornea and specialty contact lenses through her podcast channel. I think it's fun, and you can definitely learn from her and her co-host. So thank you once again, and it's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.